from the surface, it sounds like you grew up as a suburban golden child a little bit. You got to play baseball on a major collegiate team. So what was your life like going into college, and what was college like? And then when you came out, two things. What did you expect your life to be? And what did the word criminal viscerally put in your, when you were 20 or 17 when you're criminal, what flashed in front of your face and beyond?
So back to growing up for a moment. If any of your viewers want to know what the parent lottery is like, I have got to own and acknowledge I hit the parent lottery in life. And all the blessings and advantages one could ask for. I mean, positioned me to have a life of distinguishment and success. Never should have gotten immersed in the criminal justice system. So I won't spend too much more time on my upbringing in Encino, other than to say my parents did it perfectly, and I'm incredibly grateful for their love and support.
You had an upper middle class?
You could certainly say I was an upper class in the hills of Encino with vacations and trips and private schools. And neither of my parents graduated college. My mom's a paralegal, my father was a business owner, but really understood that I had an opportunity to go to college, and through baseball I excelled. So I didn't work as a kid other than feeling like baseball was a full-time gig, a full-time job, traveling from like 8 years old and beyond. And that led to the Pony World Series at 13, the Babe Ruth World Series at 14. Then ultimately I had a chance to play baseball at USC, and we went to the College World Series in 1995. So what baseball did was help condition me taught me discipline, commitment, character, and embracing rejection, because as a baseball player, even if you're great, you're going to fail 7 out of 10 times. So being an athlete conditioned me for that discipline, commitment, character, rejection. And I knew when I graduated USC, I wanted to be a business guy. I wanted to make money. I wanted to excel. I wanted to leverage off a lot of the contacts I had made as a baseball player. Even now, one of my teammates at USC is Aaron Boone, the manager of the Yankees. Gabe Kapler is the manager of the Phillies. He's a friend of mine I exercise with in the off season. So I had a lot of connections and contacts of friends that were beginning to make it in the big leagues. And I reasoned, hey, let me go and become a stockbroker and manage their money. So when I graduated USC, I began working as a stockbroker at Merrill Lynch.
In LA or New York?
In Orange County. Then I got a little homesick and I worked my way back to Los Angeles. And I worked my ass off in the office at 5, leaving every day at 10 o'clock, cold calling and cold walking all day, so much rejection. F you, don't call us, we don't want to give you any money, stop hustling, you're a useless salesman. But I had student loans from USC. They put where we ranked, the sales manager put on a board where I ranked relative to the other new trainees, and I'm competitive as an athlete, I wanted to excel. So from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. I worked every single day that first 2 years, did it the right way, and built up a business of north of $10 million. And in time, people recognized...
So this is before you're the age of 30?
Well, I'm like 22, right? And
well,
then,
you said within 5 years, so even by the time you got to that big peak, you weren't even 30.
That's correct, and I eventually wasn't a criminal, I guess, until I was 28. And back to the idea of eventually becoming a criminal, which we'll discuss, I have written that I could have imagined contracting, imagine the rarest disease that a human being can contract, leprosy as an example. I could have imagined getting leprosy, or the rarest disease, before I ever imagined I'd get immersed in the system. I didn't know anyone that had ever been to prison. The only name that we heard of in the Valley was Michael Milken, the junk bond king, who served a little time at Lompoc. Didn't know anyone, never thought it could become a part of my life, ever. And when I eventually began making bad decisions as a stockbroker at Bear Stearns and then UBS, the only thing I ever thought can happen when I knew I was making bad choices, when I knew I was crossing the line, when I knew that I was seizing opportunities to enrich myself at the expense of others, the only thing I ever thought was, maybe I get sued civilly. I can deal with a civil lawsuit. To your issue of what happened when I learned that I was a criminal or I was under investigation, I had never had any adversity or setback in my life. And I want to own that. I want to acknowledge that. People who may be watching this show or channel have endured probably more than I ever had with respect to struggle and overcoming. I never had any setbacks in my life. I was coddled, everything came easily to me.
Good.
It was not good because when adversity came, I did not know how to respond. I didn't know what to do. So the FBI shows up in my home. I have to hire a lawyer. I lie to the lawyer, throw 50 grand down the drain. Why did I lie to the lawyer? I didn't want them to see me as a criminal. I didn't want them to see me as a bad person. I wanted them to see me as the successful stockbroker.
You knew you were guilty.
I knew that I was guilty, but I wanted to create this facade that others were seeking to exploit me or get me. I even threw out the prison parlance, some snitch, my cooperator's looking to get me. It's like I go from this Jewish stockbroker to suddenly using prison slang to try to show that I'm not guilty.
Before you even went to prison.
I had no idea how to respond. So as a result of that, I began eating terribly, putting on like 20, 30, 40 pounds before I went to prison, lying to my lawyer, shutting out my family, lying to the FBI when they interviewed me, lying directly to the FBI agent's face. Despite such overwhelming evidence that I was guilty, I just did not know how to respond to what was my first real setback in life, dealing with a criminal investigation, and I responded poorly.
So for a lot of people, everyone's familiar with the phrase white collar crime, right?
Yes.
And I can imagine what it is because I have a certain type of education. But for a lot of people, it's like this blanket term. What does that mean? And can you, I know you probably don't want to rehash
Sure.
the time in your life, but what did you do? And what's the process of, you're not getting thrown on the hood of a car by the SWAT team.
Sure.
It's much more genteel.
So white collar crime is not like a criminal statute, so to speak. I think the term was originated in the 1930s by some social philosopher or something, or that talked about how executives in the workforce, when they begin to commit crime, coin the phrase white collar crime. So it's essentially this someone who may be educated, someone who may not look like they'd ever be on the wrong side of prison boundaries, someone who may not use a gun or knife as a weapon to commit a crime, but rather use our tongue as a tool to advance our own interests. And it's done so in the respects of a regular corporate job. So what was my job? I was a stockbroker with hundreds of millions of dollars under management. I had more than 600 clients. One of those clients began lying to his investors. Essentially, he ran a hedge fund. I executed the trades without getting too technical. So he'd call in and say, Justin, Google's up 10 points today. Go sell 3,000 shares, sell 4,000 puts. I would execute the trade, get paid a commission. So he was out raising money. In time, our team learned that he was lying to investors. In time, our team learned that he was losing all of his money, yet continuing to raise money. And no rational investor would give him more money if they knew that he lost everything. So we knew that he was lying. So in time, once we had 100% confirmation that he was lying to his investors, we had a dilemma. Do we shut it down and stop it, or do we try to protect ourselves and let the $100,000 a month in income continue? Sometimes more than 100 grand.
Just from him?
Just from him, then I had all of my other clients. So rather than shutting it down, I schemed with my colleagues at UBS to try to protect ourselves and let the commissions continue. So I began to attend meetings with him where I would hear him lie to his investors. And I would just turn the other way, pretend that I didn't hear it. That is willful blindness. That is a crime. In time, he would ask me to say certain things to his clients to give them comfort that their investment was still sound. That is securities fraud. Mail fraud, I learned that he was mailing things in the mail that were fraudulent. You put a stamp on the mail and it's illegal, that's mail fraud. So that are some common white collar crimes. Mail fraud, securities fraud, a willful blindness, insider trading.
Lying on a loan application.
Mortgage fraud, correct. So I've had probably more than 50 insider trading clients as a prison consultant, where you're on the golf course with a buddy and the friend says to his buddy, hey, this merger is going to go through in a couple of days. You may want to buy some of the stock. You buy it, it goes up 10 points, you make $1 million. That is insider trading. That is a white collar crime. So I've been in this space full time since 2008, because when I surrendered to prison in 2008, I realized and learned I was not the only guy that lied to their lawyers, that lied to the government, that didn't know how to respond to any adversity, that didn't know how to prepare for sentencing, that didn't know how to manage a marriage or your health, not want to spend all day in bed, crying, sleeping, depressed, wanting to do drugs and alcohol. I didn't succumb to that, but many of my clients have had those problems. And it was easier for me. I didn't even have a wife and children. I was 33. Imagine going to prison as a white-collar defendant. You're used to making 900 grand a year as a lawyer or stockbroker or mortgage broker, marriage and children. You go in, you've lost your career, you've lost your licenses. You have to manage young children while in prison. You have to come home and rebuild. So that's why I have frequently said the prison term, for me and many of our clients at White Collar Advice.
Before you go to that,
yes.
Tell us what years was this going? What year did you get charged?
So I learned that I was under investigation in 2005, and I eventually pled guilty in February 2007, and I wasn't sentenced to prison until February 2008, and I was sentenced to 18 months at Taft Federal Prison Camp.
What year did you graduate from USC?
1997.
So, and this one of my hallmarks, and this what I like to do is not just talk about crime per se, but place it in the social context.
Yep.
And talk about interesting things in history and et cetera. So you're like LA is really the tale of two cities, right? So you're in the social segment of LA where most of the money's made and no one goes to jail, but you must be aware of, just through the news and et cetera. It's also a place when you were at USC, the riot had just happened.
Yes.
South Central LA is one of the great producers of prison inmates in the United States for a variety of reasons, and most of which not to do with the people themselves. And what was your cognitive dissonance, which would have been no different than probably most people in your social setting? You know, what was LA to you, and what, you know?
So I have said there's a two-tiered system of justice that exists in the criminal justice system. There's a two-tiered system of justice in corporate America. If you produce and make enough money, you're treated differently from some of these big firms than if you don't produce. And back to your point, I always felt as if, because I was in that successful echelon, this is some of the arrogance, well, let's just call it arrogant. Entitlement would be the right word, because of the position that I had attained, in part because of where I was born. And through some hard work, had some success. But I felt as if some of the problems that might exist in Los Angeles or other places, they didn't relate to me. It wasn't my problem. I was living my life. I was doing what I thought was right. I was respectful. I wasn't taking advantage of people until I broke the law. But those problems were other people's problems. And then when I got immersed in the criminal justice system, I began to see things differently. And I began to recognize that I think how fortunate and how lucky I was for such a long time. One, that I took it for granted, and two, that this experience is bringing a sense of perspective. You talk about how many people we lock up from the streets of Los Angeles, for example, and much of it has nothing to do with their conduct, but perhaps because of how they look or where they're from. I began to see that, and here's the truth, I never would have considered it or thought twice about it until I was standing for count in federal prison. And that was a benefit to the prison experience.
What was dealing with without going into the intricacies of the criminal charges, but like how did the FBI come get you? Like, what was that? Were you raided? Did you just get a call, hey, come in and talk?
So when I lost my job in 2005 for facilitating this crime, white-collar crime can take a long, long time to play out. It could be several years from start to finish because they're cooperators and they're looking to gather evidence. So when I was fired, I immediately began a career as a real estate agent. I sold high-end real estate in Calabasas. I shared the story that before Kourtney Kardashian was rich and blew up, I was showing her property out in Calabasas. She was looking at properties with a different price point then versus now. But I just started a new career. I'm like, hey, I lost my job. I'll figure it out. I'll work hard. I got a real estate license. I'm starting to crush it, right? I'm doing great.
You had no sense of impending doom.
No, I'm like, figure some civil lawsuits are going to come. Fine, I'll deal with it. But I wasn't the criminal. My client was. I wasn't the one lying to investors. My client was. UBS is going to probably scratch a check to people who lost money. Maybe I'll participate. I had the money. So I just got on with my life and got a real estate license. While I'm doing that, my co-conspirator, who was the most culpable, who orchestrated and created this fraud, that's why we talk about the twisted criminal justice system. They don't care who's more culpable if you got swept in.
It's down first.
Correct, so he did. And I don't begrudge him that. He had a wife and 4 young kids. So while I'm lying and playing golf and getting a real estate license, lying to my civil lawyer, he's cooperating. He's working undercover. So he would show up at my home and he'd say, dude, I'm just so sorry I swept you into this and I feel terrible and you were just trying to help me as you were just trying to help me and I know that and I'm just sorry. And then I would just open up. Yeah, it's a terrible situation. I should have shut this down a long time ago. It was a lot of commissions. I knew you were misrepresenting some of your... So I had, like I said, had no idea what to expect. We're just talking like buddies were, and I didn't know he's wearing a wire. We used to meet at Twain's restaurant in Studio City. It's no longer there, Coldwater and Ventura. And he'd be wearing a wire, and of course he'd then give them to the agents. So that went on for like a year. And then after a year, I read this press release on the cover of the LA Times. It said, hedge fund manager agrees to plead guilty and securities fraud case. And I'm like, well, this isn't good. Then at the end of the release, it says the hedge fund manager admits he conspired with an unnamed co-conspirator at a major brokerage firm. So I call my lawyer and I'm like, I'm so naive. I'm so stupid at the time. I'm like, so am I the unnamed co-conspirator? He's like, yes, you are. My lawyer then called the FBI. The lawyer was Jeff Rawitz at Jones Day, called the U.S. Attorney David Willingham, who's now a defense attorney here in downtown, and said, what do you got? What's happening? And David essentially said, Justin's looking at 7 years, and Keith, my co-conspirator, due to his cooperation, is looking at 2. What would your guy like to do? And over that prior year, I did meet with the FBI once. And I've done some work with the FBI upon my release. I've trained new agents in Virginia at Quantico to help them understand white-collar crime, because I think they could do a lot of things better. I don't think they have an understanding of white-collar defendant's mind and how they can pursue it better. But I learned when I spoke with the FBI, had I not lied to them when they interviewed me, they never would have pursued prosecution. So as a result of those bad choices, I made matters worse. So it took 1 full year for me to really learn that I was like a real target. And then over the next 2 years, things played out.